Talking about music, an informal and personal look at all aspects of classical music. A written version of this podcast can be found at andrewwyndhammusic.co.uk. Episode 1. Music for All Seasons. Autumn. When does autumn start these days? I'm sure it used to be shortly after we went back to school, following the summer holidays. Not long after the term started, there might be preparations for the annual Harvest Festival. As a music teacher, I used to resent Harvest. So much work with no one to see it. It was essentially a big assembly which only the school watched, until it was agreed the preparations warranted a proper audience, and parents were allowed to attend. As a child, conkers were a big thing, and I have vivid memories of hundreds of conkers and their open cases strewn across the pavement near my local church. Collecting them was an important task that had to be carried out on a particular day. Lord knows why, or who decided that. I don't know if anyone still plays conkers now, but I do know that I never won a single game. Autumn also included Halloween, a mildly spooky time, marked by a few songs, some witchy painting or modelling at school, and possibly a film on television. At that point, it hadn't become the commercial monstrosity that it is today. And I can remember my piano teacher, Miss Page, who was a fearsome spinster, expressing her outrage and disgust on opening the front door of her house, mid-lesson, to some kids declaring, "trick or treat." Needless to say, they went away empty-handed. I think autumn's end was celebrated with Guy Fawkes Night. My 8-year-old self would walk home after school, as the afternoon light was already fading. It's still one of my favourite times of day. Looking in awe at those older children sitting in front of the illuminated high street shops, asking for a penny for the guy. The guy was usually a baggy affair with a mask made of pink or green egg box cardboard. Don't know why those two colours. Firework displays were only seen on TV, accompanied by Handel's music for the royal fireworks, but they couldn't match the excitement of the 2 boxes of Astra or standard fireworks that Dad used to bring home and light fearlessly in the back garden. Choosing which firework should be lit was a serious decision not to be taken lightly, and the empty cases were inspected carefully on the morning after. I haven't mentioned the changing foliage, whose colours make autumn one of my mum's favourite seasons. When I think back to my childhood autumns, the leaves are always wet and dark on the ground. I think I'm more likely to see the golds and reds these days, and to relish the occasional mists. Such images always strike me as slightly melancholy, perhaps because they signify the end of summer, and almost the end of the year. Winter being, for me, a season of stasis. This view has certainly influenced my autumn listening, and the suggestions I'm making for yours. Mine's a very personal view, of course, and not one shared by everyone. Indeed, the most obvious musical recommendation for Vivaldi's Autumn from the Four Seasons is not something I would necessarily listen to myself. Vivaldi sees autumn as a time for harvesting and subsequent festivities. There's a general bonhomie to the music, which speaks of time spent in the fields under an autumn sun. The jovial first movement is an evocation of dancing with a good glass of Chianti, whilst the last was inspired by the image of a hunt led by dogs and horns. Rather more gruesome scene than the music has always suggested to me. I hear a very rustic dance. Vivaldi was, in the past, dismissed as a composer and accused of writing the same concerto 400 times. This is really unfair, and there's much skillful writing in the Four Seasons that goes unnoticed as a result of its over-familiarity. I'll mention Winter, which I consider to be very modern for its time, in my next seasonal article. My first recommendation, Debussy's second book of Preludes, has little to do with autumn at all. Claude Debussy was a French composer whose life was ended by cancer at the relatively early age of 55. When I was a student, the greatest composers of the 20th century were generally considered to be Schoenberg, Stravinsky and Debussy. Bartók was sometimes included, unjustifiably in my opinion, fine composer though he was, and I did read a book which suggested that the American composer, Charles Ives, also belonged in that company. At the time, I thought this to be a ridiculous claim. 30 years later, I haven't changed my mind. In recent years, I believe Schoenberg has begun to be seen as important, but not necessarily one of the greatest. Stravinsky's status also seems to be under revision. Not so Debussy, who in my opinion deserves his reputation as one of the very greatest of all composers. His use of harmony to create colour was extraordinary, and his music is innovative, ingenious, and yet not lacking emotion. Debussy's output was not huge, but his contribution to the piano repertory was immense. If I could only play the music of two composers for the rest of my life, I would choose Beethoven and Debussy. Essentially a miniaturist, Debussy was fond of giving his pieces evocative titles which summed up the intent behind them. Footprints in the Snow, The Sunken Cathedral, What the West Wind Saw. The music doesn't seek to describe, but to give an impression of a place, scenario or character. Debussy was, in effect, a musical impressionist, a musical Monet, if you like. His second book of Preludes, more harmonically advanced than the first, opens with brouillard, fog, which swirls both rhythmically and harmonically, never settling into any definite shape and muted in colour. This is followed by Feuilles mortes, dead leaves, excuse my French accent, a sombre piece whose main figure, two notes falling, has been likened to a sigh. My next recommendation is by the Finnish composer Ainoani Rautavaara. I haven't a clue if that's how you pronounce his first name. Rautavaara is one of those composers whose early compositions might be considered avant-garde, but who later chose to write in a more accessible style. In this case, one which has been described as both neo-romantic and mystical. One of his most popular works is the three-movement Cantus Articus from 1972 for orchestra, supplemented by recorded birdsong. The first movement is entitled The Marsh. You can choose to listen just to the notes, in which case you're likely to find the music both ugly and infuriating. Can I suggest you do yourself a favour and listen for the sounds of nature? The opening flute blows through dew-tipped long grass, and there is birdsong in the discords of the trumpets, oboes and trombones. Add to this the sound of recorded birds, and the overall effect is both eerie and bewitching. Eventually, through this cacophony, steals a broad theme in the strings. What this represents, I can't say, but I find it both inspiring and moving. The second movement, Melancholy, feels more lyrical and features densely scored shifting strings. The final movement, Swans Migrating, is the most forward-moving of the three, but also the brightest. In keeping with the title, the music is written in the upper registers of the orchestra, and as a gradual crescendo, achieving a sense of something visionary. I find the Cantus Articus to be an extraordinary piece. In an ideal world, you should listen to this while going for a country walk at dusk, preferably near water. If you can't manage that, at least find time to try it when you can relax and imagine an appropriate scene. This really is a terrific introduction to modern music. On Wenlock Edge is a song cycle by Vaughan, setting 6 poems from A.E. Housman's A Shropshire Lad. It was composed in 1909 for tenor and piano quintet. Vaughan later created a new arrangement for orchestra. Both are excellent, although my preference is for the orchestral version, which to my ears offers more instrumental colour. The poems set here concern themselves with time, love, and death. The opening song, On Wenlock Edge, is one of the most vivid evocations of a windy day in all music. The tenor stands in the midst of gusts and squalls, musing that the same wind which now batters the wood had, in the past, blown through the country occupied by the Romans. The third song, Is My Team Ploughing, is an unsettling dialogue between a farm worker and the dead friend whose lover he has taken to his own bed. In the decidedly less ghoulish fifth song, the singer mourns his deceased wife. The other songs in the cycle are less downbeat, if I can phrase it like that. Indeed, in the fourth song, When I Was in Love with You, Vaughan setting is marvellously attuned to the wit and brevity of Housman's text. Oh, when I was in love with you, then I was clean and brave, and miles around the wonder grew how well did I behave. And now the fancy passes by, and nothing will remain, and miles around they'll say that I am quite myself again.
Oh, when I was in love with you, then I was clean and brave, and miles around the wonder grew how well did I behave. fancy passes by, and nothing will remain. And miles around they'll say that I am quite myself again.
I realise that my suggestions reflect a more melancholy view of autumn than you may take, and I have resisted talking about the music of Sibelius or indeed Strauss's 4 last songs, which may be considered autumnal. But I'd like to think that any of the pieces described would provide an appropriate soundtrack to an autumn afternoon. I hope you'll find time not only to explore at least some of them, but also to be prepared to give them a second chance. We're fortunate indeed if we can appreciate great art on the first encounter. I wish you happy leaf-crunching walks and a clear and frosty firework night. That was Talking About Music. A written version of that podcast can be found at andrewwyndhammusic.co.uk. Playlists to accompany these podcasts can be found on Spotify by searching Talking About Music. Thanks for listening.